right, welcome to a special NFL draft edition of Inside the Birds. Geoff Mosher here with Andrew DeCecco, and I don't know, somebody pinch me. So many things happening here on Thursday night, round one of the 2024 NFL draft. Such a chain of surprises, Andrew, that leads to the Eagles doing a very unsurprising thing, taking a cornerback in the first round, but in doing so, not having to move up, breaking a streak of over 20 years without taking someone at the position, but they land at 22nd overall on the guy who was considered widely as the number one cornerback prospect in the draft, Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo, 22nd overall, the first cornerback taken in the 2024 NFL draft. Andrew, your initial reaction to the Eagles getting Quinyon Mitchell?
Well, once the first defensive player went off the board at 15, Laiatu Latu, the board started to fall pretty favorably for the Eagles, and they were almost going. Well, they had their pick between Terry and Arnold or Quinyon Mitchell. They end up getting Quinyon Mitchell, who was my top-rated corner throughout this whole process. And you have to give a lot of credit to Howie Roseman, Geoff, for staying pat, playing the board, and not getting over eager and letting the players come to him. And he got the top-rated corner in this draft class, who they know very well. Obviously, Jason Candle, the head coach of Toledo, was teammates with Nick Sirianni, and he was a receiver there together at Mount Union. So there's a lot of familiarity there. Any information they wanted to know about this guy, they had it. He also came in for a visit. So I mean, you're getting a player who I've got a lot of questions about, Geoff, over the past couple of days. The level of competition. Are you worried about that? And I say, well, yeah, he played at Toledo, but he also played at the Senior Bowl and acquitted himself really well. And he checked off every box along the way. And I think there's something to be said for that. He rose to the occasion against premier competition, so I wouldn't be concerned about that.
Yeah, agree with you on that, Andrew, as far as being able to acquit himself against better competition. The Eagles saw that out of Carson Wentz several years ago, playing at North Dakota State, going to the Senior Bowl, acquitting himself with there as well. We had on our platform, as you know, a really good talk as part of our NFL draft preview show with Jim Nagy, who is the executive director of the Senior Bowl. So I would encourage everybody to go check that interview out. It's on our podcast and YouTube platforms because he spoke in detail about getting to know Quinyon Mitchell at the Senior Bowl and Quinyon doing some of the things, not only competing against higher level of competition, Andrew, but also at Toledo, as Greg Cosell has pointed out to us, he was mostly, almost predominantly an off corner, little to no press coverage. They had him do press coverage at the Senior Bowl. In fact, you and I, or I'm sorry, Andrew and I both, Adam and I, it's like one big ancestral family here at ITB. Adam and I
I know
watched,
what you meant. Yeah.
yeah, we watched Quinyon Mitchell go at it a lot in the one-on-ones with the Michigan wide receiver Roman Wilson, right? And those were some really good battles. But you could tell right then and there that Quinyon Mitchell was ready for the competition, was up to the challenge, did not mind being asked to do things he didn't do at Toledo. And I believe that's why he came out of the Senior Bowl. I think he probably went in with Terry and Arnold and some of the guys we'll talk about, Nate Wiggins as in that mix. He came out of the Senior Bowl and you started to hear this guy has everything you want. And then when he ran a 4.33 at the scouting combine, Andrew, that just solidified that he had the athleticism to go along with the tape. He had the competitive spirit that he showed at the Senior Bowl, and he really
And
emerged.
good ball skills
And
too.
good ball skills, right, which is very important at corner and safety too. So you're getting the complete package. And really, I think for the Eagles, you mentioned credit Howie Roseman. I agree with you. I would credit whoever might have tied Howie Roseman down as the picks got to 19, 20. So the Rams, the Dolphins right before them, those are teams that probably could have used cornerbacks as well. There was some Cooper DeJean to the Rams buzz, and certainly the Dolphins always looking for corners with what they had in the offseason happened to them. So, but Howie stayed calm. And then I'll throw this on it, Andrew. With all four of the kind of the first round corners there, credit Howie for not trying to overthink it and trade down a little bit, right? Maybe pick up
Right.
the third round pick that he's missing. They identified a guy. He's the top rated corner. No reason to move. Take the guy. And again, for the first time since the Eagles picked Lito Shepherd out of Florida, 26 overall in 2002.
Too.
2002 is the Eagles getting are the Eagles getting a first round cornerback. Let's talk a little bit about Mitchell and what he's going to bring to this team, because as Howie Roseman and the Eagles have kind of alluded to, Andrew, James Bradbury is still under contract and he's still
Right.
on the team, but you don't draft Quinyon Mitchell, a prospect like that, first cornerback taken, and say you're going to go back up James Bradbury and Darius Slay. I mean, he's going to compete to start. He's got to start unless he's for some reason has a terrible acclimation process.
Yeah, but I would also look at back in 2002, Geoff, when Lito struggled to get on the field. Yeah, he had the quad injury that sort of was nagging, but Sheldon was ahead of him. They also had they had Bobby and Troy that
Right.
were starting. So they had Trey. He didn't get on the field really until midway through his season. So I don't know that that's a surefire. You can put a stamp on that's going to happen. Obviously, it's more than likely that he's going to be the starter because you don't take somebody that high and anticipate them just sitting on the shelf. The Eagles need all the help they can get. And everything that I've gathered throughout this process tells me that he's somebody who processes information quickly. He's tough, he's competitive, he's long, and he has good ball skills. I think all those traits are going to help him acclimate to the pro level. And I'm really excited to see how he transitions to the NFL.
Yeah, that's a great point on the teams that Lito and Sheldon were drafted to. They did have Bobby and as you mentioned, Troy, right? Troy Vincent, Bobby Taylor, for those who may not be of age like we are. That was the 2002 and 2003 Eagles were probably Jim Johnson's best defenses in that era, especially the 2003 team. So you could at least say you can understand why it was tough to get on the field for a young Lito who again had some things to learn. It's a little different here. Slay's playing well enough to keep his job. Bradbury not. So like you said, you're right. We can't set it in stone, but I feel like if Quinyon Mitchell shows up and shows what he is all about and translates from Toledo over to the pro level here, then the Eagles are gonna have a hard time keeping him off the
Keeping him off
field
the
and keeping
field.
him out
Yeah,
of the starting lineup.
he,
Yeah.
he's a starter. It would, barring something unforeseen, he's going to be a starter. Absolutely, week one.
Yeah. So let's talk about why he was available at 26 as the first corner off the draft. This is something Adam Kaplan and I have touched on a lot earlier in the podcast that dropped Thursday morning, and also in our NFL draft preview show that we had Greg Cosell and Jim Nagy part of. Quinyon Mitchell and Terrion Arnold and all the other corners are very good corners. They're first round corners. But the one thing that when you talk to scouting personnel, people around the league, they would tell you is that while it's a good cornerback class, it doesn't compare apples to apples to say the elite one of a couple of years ago where J.C. Horn went 8th to Carolina and Patrick Surtain went 9th. And then a year later, you had Ahmad Sauce Gardner go top 5, right? He goes, I think, three or 4 to the New York Jets. That's not to say that these guys aren't going to be good, but I think it kind of also explains why there was such a long wait and why some other prospects, especially since this was an offensive draft for the first 10 picks, and then you started to see some linemen and pass rushers go as they usually do, why the corners got pushed down. Now, I did speak to a scouting source from the AFC, before the draft, and I was asking him about that in particular, and he agreed with that assessment that they're not the highest of blue chip corners. But what he said was they have the traits, and we just mentioned what Quinyon Mitchell was able to do, from a 40 time to a tape to a competitive spirit. They have the traits to be really good corners in the league. But Andrew, I throw it back to you with this. At this point, I don't think the Eagles or anybody who follows the team's concern should be like, is this guy going to be Sauce Gardner? Is this guy going to be Patrick Surtain? I think the concern is after so many misfires at this position, that did they get a guy who can come in and be a second and maybe even third contract guy? Can this guy hold down the fort like Lito and Sheldon did? I mean, Lito did make some Pro Bowls, but it's not like he was a Hall of Famer, but they just need that kind of level of play.
They'll be able to get that out of Quinyon Mitchell. He's somebody that I watched a lot of tape on throughout this whole process, Geoff, and I was enamored with his ability to just his competitiveness, his ability to fight for every rep. And you saw that translate onto the practice field at the Senior Bowl. I think the Eagles are getting a very mature player and someone who's not going to shy away from the spotlight. I think he's going to be able to acclimate quickly. He has a very sharp football acumen. And I like his measurable, really long arms, and he's willing to compete with any receiver out there. Seems like just a pro ready player that I wouldn't have any reservations about.
Absolutely. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun to watch a couple of things, Andrew, because if you think about it, lately the Eagles have been taking a lot of flyers, right, on guys you've been writing about at InsideTheBirds.com, whether it's a Josh Jobe, whether it's an Eli Ricks, guys who are undrafted or lower round picks who have traits. So it's not going to be new to see a cornerback in Eagles camp. And we'll, the OTAs will happen, and then training camp will really get to see him. It won't be new to per se see a guy who tests well athletically, but it will be different to see a guy who not only tests well athletically, a young kid like this, but also has the tape to match, is considered elite. I think he's got a nice frame for the position too. I mean, the guy measured
Six
in
one, 200 pounds,
6'1", right?
195. Yeah.
200 pounds. Yeah. I mean, this is sort of like, James Bradbury is the taller physical guy out of the Bradbury
But he
sled,
can't
but
run.
he
He
don't
can't
run like, yeah, exactly.
No.
So, I mean, this is going to be a new toy, a shiny new toy. And by the way, one thing we've been told is that, Vic Fangio was really pressing hard to get an upgrade. It's not as if Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni didn't realize they needed it, but Vic Fangio was pressing hard. He wanted an elite defensive player or prospect, and that is going to obviously make him very happy.
Yeah, no surprise there. And I was asked this question recently over the past week or so. Do I believe that Vic Fangio is going to have a lot of say or sway in some of the personnel that sort of comes on through the draft and even free agency? And the answer to that is simply yes. You don't take that job at that age with that sort of tenure in the league if you don't have say in, and maybe not player name specific, but it might be like, hey, you have to prioritize corner, you have to prioritize linebacker. I'm not going to pick names, but you have to be able to give me something athletically that I could work with.
Awesome. Definitely. I did have an opportunity to speak with Quinyon Mitchell at the Senior Bowl after, I believe, the second day's practice. I found him to be very businesslike, professional. Some people, a friend of mine texted me, he doesn't look like he's happy. This is right as he was getting drafted. And I said, nah, you know what? I got that vibe from him on the field was that, some guys at that position can be divas. Some guys can be, look at me. But I got the whole staid persona, which is good for that position. You forget about any bad plays, you move on. And another thing I did, I personally asked him, in an era of NIL and transfer portal, when you play that well at Toledo, why didn't you go transfer somewhere else or maybe, get an opportunity, maybe get a financial uplift somewhere else? And he said he had loyalty to the program. They wanted, they were the ones that found him. He felt like he made a name for himself there. He wanted to win at Toledo. I believe it was really praiseworthy of Jason Candle, the head coach you mentioned, who was a teammate of Nick Sirianni's at Mount Union, which, by the way, had to be fantastic for intel, right, for the whole organization, as you mentioned.
And Vince Karras, the defensive coordinator, the son of Larry Karras, who was Nick Sirianni's head coach. So there's obviously a ton of information that could have been gleaned simply from those resources.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all could have projected, and at some points we did, Quinyon Mitchell to the Eagles, just not at 22 overall. I think, you come away, and that's the biggest surprise. The way the draft fell, Howie should probably send some thank you cards to the Atlanta Falcons for taking Penix, to the Vikings for taking McCarthy,
The Broncos,
the Raiders taking Bowers, right? The Broncos, because it just kept pushing the two positions that the Eagles were looking at, offensive line and corner down. And then once you got to, I don't know, like 15, 16, when the Colts took Leitu Latu, right, a pass rusher, and then the Vikings traded up to take Dallas Turner, man. And then the Bengals sort of shocked everybody by taking Amarius Mims. Shocking because they took an offensive tackle because they never seemed to want to do that, but also because it was Amarius Mims. It just felt like the time was right, and that this was going to work out for the Eagles. I wonder, though, if you had any thought in your mind as it was starting to get to the Eagles about Terrion Arnold being the guy because A, he played at Alabama, and B, Greg Cosell called him a mirror and match master. It's one of his
He
biggest
is, yeah.
strengths, and that is obviously a big staple of the Vic Fangio defense.
But he doesn't run as well as Quinyon Mitchell, and there's obviously a value placed on that. It crossed my mind for a moment that the Eagles might consider trading down when you
Hmm.
looked at a logjam of players that they would seemingly be interested in. Graham Barton was a player who I thought that a lot of value at tackle, guard, and center. Maybe Kool-Aid McKinstry later in the draft, and maybe you pick up a third round pick, which, as I tweeted earlier, not having a third round pick is so critical because there is so much talent that falls within that range. Linebackers, safeties, off the top of my head, Trevin Wallace, the linebacker from Kentucky, Cedric Ray. So I thought that there was a chance that they may consider trading down and recouping maybe a third round pick and grabbing an alignment or even a corner like Kool-Aid. But they stand pat as it were, and they grab the top corner on the board, and good for them.
Yeah, and by the way, your point on him being a playmaker in college, maybe separating him from the pack, the Eagles certainly need that at that position. In 2022, his junior year, he led the FBS with 25 PBUs. He had 5 interceptions. I'm sorry, 20 PBUs, 5 interceptions. And then his last year here at Toledo, he was a second team Associated Press All American, first team All MAC, 18 PBUs, started 13 games. Not a bad tackler, by the way, either. He's a physical player. That is the one thing that scouting sources told us, and we heard it from Jim Nagy and Greg Cosell, not afraid to be physical. Sometimes you worry about that with cornerbacks. Certainly, that was a question about Nate Wiggins, who blazed the 4.29 at the 40 at the combine. But no, this is a kid who runs fast and will tackle. He had an interception. He blocked a kick, and he set a school record at Toledo with 46 career PBUs. I mean, he really does combine all the traits. One thing I don't like to do, Andrew, anymore, probably in the last 10 years of being a reporter, is call a pick a good pick or a bad pick. I like to evaluate process. You just never know how a pick's going to work out. They could work out for different reasons than you thought. They could be not work out for different reasons than you thought. Teams do a lot of homework on these guys. What I like about the approach here is that it's not just an immediate need, it's a future need. It's a need that they've had for quite a while. They've tried to address the position in the past and haven't. There's a clean record of character, of production. The only thing that you're really missing, right, is the high level competition outside the Senior Bowl and the fact that he mostly was a zone corner and doesn't have a whole lot of press man. But honestly, in college football, you watch so many corners. I'm sure you could say that about a million corners in
Yeah,
college football these
absolutely.
days.
That's why I never really took that into consideration. The level of competition you play against who you play, but you want to see him dominate against that competition and see a clear, division between him and the players that he's going against. And I saw that. And then I wanted to make sure that I was able to cross-reference that at the Senior Bowl, and my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. He replicated his performance that I've seen on the Toledo tape. So I mean, the Eagles are getting a big time player there, a playmaker, and with the new development of the coaches that are there, Christian Parker, Vic Fangio, these are coaches that have a long-standing history of developing players, and I don't think
Mm-hmm.
that should be understated.
Well, that's a great point, especially in the secondary, right? Yeah, no, it shouldn't be understated. All right, that's great. And by the way, um, the Eagles allowed a NFL high 35 touchdown passes last year. Worst in the league. It was an embarrassment over the last. I mean, it was embarrassment all year long, really. The 1-8 record over the last 9 years, or 1-7 over the last 8, sort of exacerbated it. But some people forget all their communication issues in the secondary, all their coverage issues, all the passing time. That started pretty early in the season. The New England Patriots, who couldn't score on anybody, got 3 touchdown passes out of Mac Jones in the season opener
Yeah,
against
you,
that
you
Eagles.
remember you remember who saved the game for him? Josh Jobe, my
Josh,
guy,
yeah, that's
Josh Jobe.
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go figure. Well, the Eagles have a lot of guys at that position now that they'll take a look at. Now, we've been talking about Lido and Sheldon, right? And let's kind of look ahead to Friday. All right. The Eagles have the 50 and 53rd overall pick in the second round. They have no third round pick. They certainly have areas that they still need to address on defense. But with the way the first round board fell, Andrew, there might be some pretty good defensive players in the secondary at corner and safety that are there at 50, 53 that maybe we didn't think would be there.
Yeah, Max Melton, corner from Rutgers, Tyler Nubin, the safety from Minnesota. But I would also like to highlight some of the edge rushers that could be available at 50 or 53.
Go for it.
Marshawn Nealon from Western Michigan, Adisa Isaac from Penn State, who I thought he would have been gone, you know, 35 to 45, but the way that the board fell, Geoff, he could very well be available there.
Hmm.
Jaden Hicks is another safety I like, who's going to be probably a factor later on day two. I mean, they're going to have a lot of options here to go with, but like I said earlier, not having that third round pick really hurts them because there's so much talent that's going to be sort of bleeding into day two, and day three or third round is where I think that they could really address that linebacker position. Because I don't really know if they're going to go round two, but if they do, Junior Colson has to get heavy consideration at 50 or 53. My top rated linebacker in this draft class. He has an old school build at 250. He's physical. He's willing to come downhill and play the run, but he's also the best coverage linebacker in this draft class. He can run sideline to sideline, smart player. I mean, I think that he's had the most consistent tape down to down throughout this whole process. And Edgerrin Cooper's got most of the shine, but he's more of a will linebacker, whereas Junior Colson's a Mike, which is what they would really need.
I mean, it's safe to say there's some pretty good defensive talent that should be on the board. We'll see if Howie can sit still again or if he feels the need. Now, again, without a third round pick, I mean, it's hard. It's going to be hard. They do have the future pick from the Hassan Reddick trade. I joked with you before we started recording this that it wouldn't shock me if Howie tried to package 50 and 53 or one of those picks in the future to get back into the first round to get another cornerback since they were all still there. Obviously, we know that Terry and Arnold wound up going a few picks later, 24th actually to the Detroit Lions, but there were still a lot of corners there that we had talked about. And, it would have been funny to see them to truly go out and get the Lido and the Sheldon 22 years later. But it should be a fun day too. And of course you will be around to cover it with me. And of course, day three is your day. We call that Andrew DeCecco Day at Inside the Birds.
Yeah, can we trademark that?
Yeah, sure. You
Can we
got it.
patent that? Andrew DeCecco Day, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. All yours. So stay tuned. There will be a lot of coverage of the NFL draft. Adam Kaplan will be rejoining us as well for the next 2 days at various points, and then we'll wrap it all up. So any last thoughts here on Quinyon Mitchell before we call this a video?
Oh no, I'm stunned that he was available at 22. Obviously, he's not a blue chip player. It's not a Pat Surtain, which you outlined very well earlier on. But I mean, the Eagles come away with a top rated corner. Anyone who has any skepticism surrounding this, don't overthink it. The Eagles got a lot better today. They got a surefire starter from day one, and they have the coaches in place that are going to help develop. So I would. There's a lot to look forward to with this.
Yeah. Now, who is it that used to point to his watch as if it's about damn time? Would that be Freddie Mitchell?
Freddie Mitchell.
All right. Well, if Freddie Mitchell, who is always bouncing around the Delaware Valley, usually, if he were watching this draft and he were still paying attention to the Eagles, he would be doing this right now. About damn time. 22
Yes,
years
they
later.
would.
Philadelphia Eagles finally get a cornerback and the guy who's considered the top rated cornerback in the draft. Andrew, thanks to you. It's been great. For Andrew DeCecco, I'm Geoff Mosher. You've been watching a special NFL draft edition of Inside the Birds.